Hello, everybody. My name is Latasha, as Jam says, Latasha Roland. I teach currently fifth grade math and science. And so I'm just going to walk you through how I streamline a lot of my systems to transfer, I don't want to say seamlessly or flawlessly, but almost flawlessly over to virtual learning. Just a little tidbit. I am a Edulastic innovator, a Khan Academy ambassador, and I'm also sitting on the board of a nonprofit called Fly Math Club. It's a math club for girls. So the first thing is, like, I had to really think about when this hit. I had spring break, so I had a week off to really think about how I wanted things to look. So a lot of things I did where I was already impacting or doing in my classroom. So what my instruction looked like in room 216 is I had math workshop. I rarely taught whole group. I taught exclusively in small groups. I used Edulastic exclusively as the tool to pull data to make my groups while my kids were working. When I had small groups, while I was working with students, my kids either had choice boards or task lists. I'm gonna go more in depth with that. I got these groups basically by bi-weekly mini mastery quizzes, about 10 questions or so to see where they're at. If a kid wasn't ready to move on to the next level, they stayed in their group. If the kid got an 80% or higher within their mastery quiz, I moved them up to the next group, and we just kind of flow from there. And then they always had weekly homework packets. So in thinking about how I did this in the classroom, it really took me a minute to think back to how can I flip this into a virtual setting. So the one thing I did with flipping this, I realized that first week I relied heavily on task lists, pre-recorded videos, and just different tools like Khan Academy. I used a lot of Ed Puzzle videos. My kids love games. I had a couple gaming sites. And what I realized when I flipped it, I wasn't getting the participation, and kids, when they took their first quiz, because we were coming up on a quiz anyway, they struggled heavily. So I had to sit back and realize, what do I need to make sure, one, kids are participating, two, parents knew what to expect in this new environment, and how can I create buy-in with my students? So the biggest things I did when I shifted to this flip model is I made sure parents had newsletters weekly. Every Sunday, a parent got a newsletter of what to expect for that week, any major announcements, and they got a snapshot of the schedule. Every Monday morning, my class and I met as a class virtually. I set the tone for the week, gave any questions, any expectations they need to know. I relied heavily on task lists as opposed to choice boards, but the task list gave kids choice, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then I continue with small group instruction. I have a lot of, if you're like me, I have varying ability levels in my classroom. So I had kids who were really low, and I had kids who were really high. So my low kids really needed that one-on-one attention, whereas my high kids was all on the independence. And I shifted my mini mastery quizzes from 10 questions to 5, just to give me a snapshot of data. And I basically made sure I was available. Prior to the virtual learning, I was available in the evenings, on the weekends, via my cell phone number, but I made sure I had virtual office hours. And so how does look? A snapshot of my week was, as I said, parents got a newsletter every Sunday. I use the Remind app, if you're familiar with that, to communicate solely with parents. I sent out 4 Remind messages throughout the week to remind them to tell their kids to get to the meetings, let them know when the assignments were due. And I only allowed parents to communicate with me via Remind app. I wanted to separate the types of communications I was getting. So my students had access to me directly on my cell phone, whereas the parents, I advocated for them to only contact me via Remind. That way I knew where the things were coming from. And so kicking off that week, then my task lists were just an array of everything. Because I implemented small groups, instead of doing pre-recorded videos, I made sure that, similar to our classroom structure, when I had a small group, my students were at their table groups or their desks working on a choice board or a task list or whatever assigned activity. So I used a lot of different virtual websites, like Learning Legends is a math and science game website where it's literally a video game aspect of learning math. My skills practice task was exactly what we were practicing in our small group. So they always had tasks to do directly in their small group. Vocabulary quizzes. I use Edulastic to pull my data. And then if they needed more support post the small group, they had pre-recorded lessons. And I did also pre-recorded math notes. And so lastly, my schedule was pretty, I was meeting with kids every day, Monday through Friday, but I made sure I tailored it out where it wasn't overwhelming for myself or kids. So every Monday morning we had our class meeting. Immediately after that class meeting, I had my first group for my first block. So we only had 2 blocks. And then every day up until Friday, I had a group. I try to keep it consistent. Just like the last speaker said, I kept the times consistent so kids knew what time they had to log on. Parents knew what time they had to log on. Everything was streamlined within their task list. They didn't have to click through a bunch of different things in Google Classroom. Everything they needed was on their task list. So this is what the 2 types of communications that I sent out to parents. So essentially the parents on the left, this is what a parent newsletter looked like. I literally streamlined everything they needed to know. And at the bottom is what I sent out, what was a snapshot of our learning week. Because I had 2 subjects to teach, my task list went from 2 to 1, and I combined it. So everything that they needed to do was linked directly in that document. They didn't have to search anything else on their Chromebooks. I mean, working with 5th graders, they can get kind of overwhelmed. If you notice, I have red, some things are red, some things are green. I wanted to provide kids choice. So if something was green, it was optional. I mean, they could do it, they didn't have to. But it was red, it was mandatory for them to do. After about a week or so, I went from bi-weekly quizzes to weekly quizzes because I needed, we were moving kind of quick because they had just had more time. Instead of a 90-minute block, most kids are working on math throughout the day. And so this is a snapshot version of how I use my quiz, the Edulastic to create my group. So this is one of my higher groups. And we were finishing up fraction, multiplying a fraction by a fraction. And as you can see, most of my students did fairly well. They got 80% or higher. But the 3 students who got below 80%, they maintained on that skill level. And the other 6 students, I moved up to the next group. So we went on to multiplying mixed numbers while the 3 students stayed within this round until they passed on to the next level. A lot of these things, so a common pitfall that I faced is initially I had pre-recorded videos, and it just wasn't the best tool for my students. I had to really think about how I was going to get to my low-level learners and reach my goal of making sure the kids were ready for 6th grade. And so I did modify it to small group instruction. I didn't want to overwhelm myself, so it was no more than 2 groups a day. And I also utilized our teacher assistants as well for my really low students who really need one-on-one support. They also had a small group, and I worked with the teacher assistant to get the lessons out to her, and then she will work with those students one-on-one if they needed more time on a concept. Another thing is still lack of student participation. Parents did not know what was going on. And I felt that I'm not a parent myself, but I have friends and family who are parents, so I understood that. So we did parent meetings. It just opened the eyes, really walked through what this was going to look like for their 5th grade student. And then my parents and myself, we relied heavily on communication. I even had some Zoom meetings with parents who wanted to help their kids with the math work. The one thing I've taken away from this experience, I don't know what to expect next year. I'm pretty sure several people are in that mindset. But I want to explore a way to create more social learning in that environment. I begin to dabble with it. Everything I've done virtually can be done in a classroom. And that's, like I said, that was a streamlined approach. So if you create these structures and systems in the classroom and in the event that you have to go back to virtual, it should be a streamlined transition. I wanted my kids to feel like the only thing that was different was that they were at home and they didn't get to see their friends. But everything, some of my students even said they like this even better because they can just do their work without having to wait. They had a week to get their stuff in from Monday till Sunday at midnight. So it was one of those things where some kids actually rather enjoyed this style of learning. And then I want to explore a flipped classroom model moving into the next school year because there's several tools at hand that knowing what kids like that I can particularly try on and utilize.